I believed my husband was just really broken and didn't understand my feminine heart, and that's what made my marriage highly conflicted, isolating, lonely, and painful. And that one day God would save him and he would become like husband one. The problem was that I didn't understand enough theology to know that he wasn't a sleeping sheep. He wasn't an unbeliever that just hadn't accepted God yet. I'd never been taught that there are goats and tares and wolves. I mean, I read the verses, but I had no idea what those differences really meant. No one had taught me. No one teaches that from the pulpit or at a ladies' group. So the man pretending to be my husband was a wolf in sheep's clothing, but I didn't have the biblical knowledge or the feminine skills to understand what that really looks like inside your marriage. I didn't understand that it was really just wishful thinking when I was praying for him to be saved or to stop hurting me, because all my praying was too childlike and not backed up with the truth in God's word. I was never going to have an equally yoked marriage because God doesn't make a one flesh relationship out of darkness and light. He separates it. 2 Corinthians 6:14. So in marriage, a husband is either cleaving to his wife, like husband number one, or he's throwing breadcrumbs for her, which is what happens with the second and third kinds of men. There's a small distinction here that makes a massive impact. 2 or 4. That's important to remember because it's a big key that exposes the difference between a difficult husband and a dangerous man. Not understanding that key is how we stay blind. What happens is when your husband is not cleaving to you, we don't use the term breadcrumb because we've been conditioned to accept that it's a weakness or a brokenness, like a handicap or an inability that's impossible to change, instead of naming it what it really is. It's sin. God gave men the responsibility of the one flesh relationship in marriage, and whether a man knows it or not, if he doesn't cleave to his wife, he's not just sinning against his sister in Christ, but he's also sinning against God. But Christianity doesn't call out sin as sin anymore, which is great for predators, but not so great for their wives. Instead, wives are conditioned to deny the truth of their own experiences in marriage by giving this particular sin different names. In the 90s, the big term was emotionally unavailable men. Now, that terminology has been completely blown up with the idea of attachment theory. I looked so hard to find excuses for Dean in these diagnoses that I ended up blinding myself to the possibility of even thinking about asking the question. Maybe he's not lazy or clueless about femininity. Maybe he's not broken and wounded. Maybe he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, what wife wants to ask that question? So, I buried the truth that I knew because it was just too messy to even consider, and I didn't have the skills or maturity to figure it out by myself. Plus, honestly, I didn't really want to accept the truth. The truth was that something's not right. Something feels off. Every institutional church, well, almost all of them, have conditioned women to accept that after they get married, it's okay for masculinity to completely neglect femininity, as long as they call it by those psychological diagnoses that the world uses. That's not what God says. In His Word, He calls it sin when a person doesn't do what He says they should do, when a person doesn't live in the capacity that God designed them to be in. If your husband intentionally showed interest in pursuing you before you got married and then stopped after you got married, if you're feeling and asking, what happened? Why isn't it like it was in the beginning of our relationship, that means he was cleaving and then stopped. It means it's a choice he's making to not cleave to you. He's not emotionally unavailable or disordered in his attachment. If he was, he never would have intentionally pursued you in the beginning. God tells husbands that they're the ones responsible for the one flesh relationship in 3 different places: Genesis 2, Ephesians 5, and 1 Peter 3. In Genesis 2, a man leaves in order to cleave to his wife. It's the purpose of leaving his family home. And if he's not going to cleave to his wife, a man's got no business getting married. In Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3, God frames his words as imperative commands to husbands. You can see that by looking into the Greek, but you can also see it because both imperatives have got consequences attached to them. I'll be going into 1 Peter 3 in another video in this series, but in Ephesians 5, God has empowered femininity to deliver the consequence to the man. That's kind of cool, right? As a wife, you have the choice in how to respond to your husband's actions towards you. It's a simple little conjunction in verse 33 called hina. If he loves you like himself, you'll feel it, and your body will organically generate respect for him. But if he doesn't love you, as if you're part of his own body, your heart is also going to feel that, and your body will respond negatively. Love from the masculine towards the feminine will cultivate respect from her, but it doesn't work the other way around. Testosterone and estrogen are not the same operating systems, just called by different names. You can't simply invert the principle of love and respect and expect the same results. Respect cultivates acceptance, not love. So when a husband says no to cleaving to his wife, he's saying yes to sinning against her. He's choosing himself instead of her. He's choosing to make excuses to sin against her instead of doing the work he's commanded to do in order to cleave to her. The reason you feel a difference in your body from earlier in your marriage to present is because there is a difference. Your feminine heart desires that intentionality from masculinity, and she knows she's not receiving it. Your heart knows she's being sinned against. If you think you might be receiving breadcrumbs instead of being cleaved to, I've got a video that explains how to lean back away from your husband when he sins against you. Watch the video. It's part 2 from a playlist called Heal Your Femininity. And if you've been told that respecting your husband is a command from the Lord, or that if you just respect him enough, he'll love you, please watch the video called Don't Respect Your Husband. In that one, I dive deeper into the hina principle. I'll put links for the both of them in the description box as well. Bye for now.